The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
Now, you're very welcome along. Joe Molloy with you this afternoon. Very happy to say, both in studio. First time since 2020 I've had two newspaper guests here in studio. Dion, Associate Editor at The Currency. Great to have you in.
Hi, Joe.
And Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Daniel, hello.
Joe, Dion, how are things?
Daniel.
So the back pages then, the Sun have Guardiola here. Staying is their headline. They say, much like Jurgen Klopp, new Pep deal to 2025. City restore 1-point lead. They had a 4-0 win against Leeds yesterday. So it seems that Pep Guardiola will stay at the Etihad until 2025. And then they have Con with the win. Con O'Callaghan back for Dublin yesterday. They were emphatic winners against Wexford. 124 to 4-point winners. We have the Sunday Times. Top right-hand corner, I guess this is the way of the world, unfortunately, for the Sunday papers. Certainly the paper edition. Katie Taylor, how did she do? For a report of her Big World fight, you can go to the sundaytimes.ie/sport. So they do have Katie on the front page, and she did win on points decision, I'm sure you've seen by now. And beneath that, Adele McMahon celebrating Niamh Jones's first half try at the Kingspan. Happy ending. And it was right at the death that the Irish women's rugby team avoided the Six Nations wooden spoon with a try in the 82nd minute. Beneath that, Raiola death leaves cloud over Pogba and Haaland transfers. This is Mino Raiola, who passed away after lung issues over the last number of months. So he represents numerous players, including Paul Pogba and Erling Haaland, amongst others. Sunday Independent then. So the Premier League race continues, and the headline there of Sam Wallace and Jim White, pressure builds with title climax looming, and the picture is Conor Callaghan, return of the king. Big relief for Dublin to have him back yesterday. There were doubts over his participation this year's championship. Sunday World also going with the Dubs. Brian Fenton was brilliant, or as they say, fantastic last night. And Klopp's in love is the headline. Jurgen Klopp has declared he is loving the nail-biting Premier League finale. Sunday Mirror going with Liverpool's win at Newcastle as their main picture. Naby Keita with the goal, and above Man City's win at Ellen Road, which did look on the face of it like something of a banana skin, but they won well in the end. Mail on Sunday, back page, we can take the pressure. Again, this is the words of Guardiola and Klopp, both saying they can take the pressure. And Mino's mission will continue, say family, after his death. Mino's mission of making football a better place for players will continue, said the family. And sometimes back page sports people make the front pages. In this instance, front page of the Mail on Sunday, Stephen Roach. Stephen Roach is guilty of fraud, is the headline on the Mail on Sunday. This is Michael O'Farrell, the investigations editor, and Jared Cousins in Spain. Cycling hero Stephen Roach has been ordered to pay €750,000 after a Spanish court found he bankrupted his Marbella firm and plundered its assets to finance a luxury lifestyle, the Irish Mail on Sunday can reveal. This is what they refer to as a damning civil court ruling. They found that Mr. Roach deliberately and consciously stripped the assets from his cycling holiday firm rather than repay creditors before disappearing from Marbella in 2017. He has now been banned from acting as a company director. Turning to page 6, in Spain for 7 years and could be exposed to criminal prosecution. The Mail on Sunday did speak to Stephen Roach last night, who lost his father, Larry, this week. They had as well. And he says, I'll bounce back definitely. I promised my dad I would. The big thing is we're appealing. It's not definitive. So the company here in question, Shamrock Events, they went bust in 2017, says the piece, leaving creditors out of pocket. The creditors mainly hotels where paying customers would stay as part of the package. It's a 41-page ruling from the Palma Commercial Court, and they conclude that Mr. Roach did not heed staff warnings that his firm was in trouble and that he worsened the situation by using company funds to finance a luxury lifestyle, is what it says here. So the judge says Mr. Roach was perfectly conscious of its debt situation, and instead of adopting measures to avoid financing the company or entering into voluntary insolvency, he continued to loot the company accounts for his own private use when there was a minimum amount of income in them. Mr. Roach's expenditure on things like golf, apartment rentals, hotels in Switzerland and Hungary, restaurants, clothes are all evidence of a life of luxury and spending while his creditors weren't paid, say the court. So again, Stephen Roach did speak to the Mail on Sunday last night. He said to the Mail on Sunday, "I've seen the document the same as you've seen, and I do appreciate it's not very nice. The big thing is we're appealing. It's not definitive." He said, "We need to wait until the appeal goes through. I can't talk about it now, but there's no proof of a lot of things, and there are huge consequences for something that's not totally clear." And he said there was a lot going on with COVID and everything else. "I haven't had access to all the information." He's intending to sit down with his lawyers from Monday and have meetings to prepare their case. They have 15 days to appeal. And finally he said, "People will believe whatever they want to believe. At the end of the day, it is what it is. I'm trying to bounce back. I will bounce back, definitely. I promised my dad I would." So Stephen Roach there speaking to the Mail on Sunday about that situation in Spain. The Mino Raiola news there on all the front pages. Extraordinary figure in many respects, Dion. I'm sure you wondered, as we all did at times, how when Paul Pogba went to Manchester United for 89 million, that he reportedly received 41 million for that deal. I always wondered that. I wondered how Pogba, Manchester United or Juventus thought that was a good situation. But whatever way Raiola worked, it worked. And now he's passed away. A lung issue. I mean, it was curious. On Thursday, there was a report that he had passed away, and he took to Twitter to dispel that. And yesterday, it was announced in far more sombre fashion. So Mino Raiola passed away at a very young age, 54.
Yeah, it's very sad. Clearly this week there was the, that slightly distasteful way it seemed to kind of, people seem to be going to try to break the story, before, when he was alive, but like an extraordinary figure. And as you say, I think the reason players are allowed, are content when he does a deal like the Pogba deal, because they feel that over the course of their association with him, there will be a lot coming their way too that wouldn't have come their way if it wasn't for him. Now you could argue that both ways, really. You could wonder if that's really true. What agents do to persuade players in some instances that they are so essential to their lives. But then you read in the piece in the Sunday Times, about Raiola and his relationship with his players. And again, you get that example of how players outsource so much to agents and other people, and that isn't a new thing, but it's clearly it's more and more widespread in terms of players doing that. And it says the line, Raiola was the man Mario Balotelli, then of Manchester City, called when his Cheshire mansion was on fire. Raiola advised him to call the fire brigade, but his first call was to Raiola. Then he thought about the fire brigade. As the fire, I don't know where the fire was at this point, how close it was to Balotelli, but he said, I'll get Mino onto this.
Thank God he answered.
Yeah, well, I'd say he always answered. I think that's one of the things you can be sure of. But this is the way, and Dan knows this as well. That sense, ever-growing sense of footballers basically saying you have control of our lives. And I remember years and years ago an old kind of sports company exec sitting around telling stories about a very, very famous footballer, and how he had been done over by his agents at the time. And the story, and always struck me, the story he gave was this guy was always losing mobile phones, and he was with him one day and he'd realised he'd lost his mobile phone, and he said, I lost it. That's another grand down the drain. Because every time he lost the phone, he called his agent and said, will you get me a new phone? And his agent billed him $1,000 for the phone.
Yeah.
Now, Raiola obviously looked after his players and everything, but again, just that dependency that was there. And again, when you see his conflict with somebody like Ferguson, who wanted to be that person in the players' lives, and there is an ego clash there too, because Ferguson fell out with people. He fell out with Paul Stratford. He fell out with people who had a hold over players because he wanted to be that person. And I think in the Mail on Sunday piece, interesting, the Raiola said, there's a quote from Raiola where he says he would have loved to have had Paul Gascoigne as a player, because he felt he would have saved him. The exact same thing Alex Ferguson has always said. They saw themselves as similar figures in their players' lives, and I think that's why someone like Ferguson, who called Raiola a shitbag, kind of came into conflict with him.
Like Ferguson, even, so I would have worked with Keith Gillespie on his book a number of years ago now, and he would have told a story about how when Keith Gillespie was the make weight in the Andy Cole to Newcastle transfer, it was actually Ferguson who did the contract negotiations for Gillespie with Newcastle at this point, and actually sort of, they bumped up what Gillespie was earning at Manchester United to sort of get him in more favourable terms with Newcastle, and there was that degree of he was still the overlord. But what I find about this, isn't it? Football is a global industry, populated by hundreds, thousands of agents. Yet clearly there's these couple of super agents who manage to elevate themselves to a status that they are the ones you have to go to. And in fairness, whatever you would say about Raiola, and you can call him a shitbag or you can call him whatever, but Jorge Mendes was working in a nightclub or something, wasn't he? He had some sort of an unremarkable background. Raiola was working in a family restaurant, he moved to Holland as a kid from Italy. It's not as if he's sort of some ex-player who had the keys handed to him or something like that. There's clearly an incredible skill and sort of resourcefulness and a sort of a brilliant brain there. However they chose to use it, and we will all talk and we will have long discussions about the scourge of agents, and a lot of those points could be very, very valid, but in some other ways you have to admire the sort of the work ethic, even to be on call all the time just in case a player sets his house on fire, to be there at all times. And I think it's the Simon Jones piece in the Mail today, the Mail on Sunday, who was clearly a reporter who would have dealt with him, and he's a highly intelligent man who could converse in 7 languages. Raiola was gregarious, witty and caring. Though you could never leave a voicemail on his phone, you could text, or if lucky he would answer you or call you back. After gaining his trust, he would keep in touch. Now obviously what you're saying from that is clear that Raiola was directly himself a very useful source on stories that were going on, and he obviously was able to use that to his advantage on several occasions. But you do see the sort of the super agent that I actually haven't read, and maybe this has been written before, how Haaland came to be Raiola's, how that happened, because obviously his dad is involved in football, Alfinga, so he would have had the ability to navigate certain things, but clearly at some stage someone says, no, you need to go with Raiola because he's the one who gets deals done for you.
Let's turn to Neil Francis. This is in the main Sunday Times section as opposed to the sports section. Cocaine, the hidden scourge of schoolboy rugby in Ireland is the headline.
It's the front page as well, we should say, on the front page of the newspaper.
Boys are tempted by the drug over drinking beer while girls see it as an appetite suppressant, one of the bylines. So it starts with an anecdote from a Leinster Senior Cup game. I'm taking it fairly recently, and the group at large are in the pub after the game. And Neil Francis writes, a colleague who had a son on the team was there and at one point went to the men's bathroom. When he walked in, at least 7 of the players were snorting cocaine. So we're talking 16, 17-year-olds here. And Neil Francis says they continued to snort the powder right in the middle of the room, with the coaches, teachers and rest of the parents outside, blissfully unaware of what was going on just a couple of metres away. That's all I can say about that incident, apart from the fact that my information is first-hand, and it is true. If some rugby schools are doing cocaine, are not the GAA schools and football schools of Ireland doing it too, he asks. And he says later, some schools know there is an issue. He says a number of them employ companies to send sniffer dogs into the locker rooms and the common areas during the academic year. He says of rugby at large, several rugby clubs are known for having, quote, a marching powder tradition. There's one club in Dublin where literally the entire squad is using cocaine and has a supplier on board. And he describes the amateur game as a hotbed for cocaine. It says generally drug taking somehow became fashionable in the 60s and 70s. Now it's reached the point where many people will not think twice about taking cocaine, in particular children. it's on that basis I had to write about it, is how he starts off. So that catches the eye, doesn't it?
You know, it does, and it's it's a sort of quite a detailed piece because it spins into a sort of page 4 inside a sort of a whole broadsheet page almost, and a mixture of sort of anecdotal tales, and it sort of spins out towards the end into a broader discussion, I suppose, of speculating how much cocaine was used at Croke Park last weekend, for the Ed Sheeran gig, and it goes on. Like he mentions, for example, because testing is obviously an issue here, in schools rugby it does not matter. This is with regard to sort of being vulnerable to testers, because by law you cannot test a 17-year-old at a game unless their parents are with them and consent. It references drug tests after international matches and so on. I mean, it is an interesting talking point broadly. I mean, to me, sometimes a lot of the problems that exist within sport, they're just an extension of societal issues in many respects. Like cocaine is rampant in Irish life now. Like anyone, who is immune to that just isn't talking to people, and it is something that naturally, without sort of being broadly sort of generalising, but the age profile of people playing sport competitively now would overlap with areas of life where you would imagine there's quite a large volume of use. And it is one of these where you look at it and you say, what do you do? And it's like, what do you actually do about it? But I think maybe, it's something that maybe isn't written about too much. Like, for example, every so often the topic of drugs and football would come up. It's obviously very, it's just clearly, would be, concerns about the high end of football, how it hasn't had, a drugs scandal, unlike maybe other sports, where you have sort of cycling and various other sports which are sort of have been very well exposed in this regard. And of course, as any sort of journalist would, you would sort of ask questions and stuff, and I would, ask questions to people within football on a number of occasions about, well, what's the issue there? And it's been put to me, I remember being put to me very clearly at one stage that if you're talking about a drug issue in football, what you don't realise is the amount of people who are risking their career for the sake of a good Saturday night. Mm-hmm. And, the levels of sort of testing, you would say would still be modest, and you'd hear the odd anecdotal tale of a tester popping up somewhere on a Sunday or a Monday and sort of lads heading for the car park, in an absolute panic. And this is just an extension of life at the moment, and this is the issue. Now, the 16, 17-year-old aspect of this is still a small bit shocking, I have to say, but maybe, again, I don't know what 16, 17-year-olds are doing, but at a sort of older age, it's not surprising at all.
Well, that struck me as well, Dion, the headline, The Hidden Scourge of Schoolboy Rugby in Ireland. It's really just the scourge of society in Ireland, and the fact that it's reached schoolboy rugby shows the extent of that scourge. Yeah,
I think that's probably true, although there may be some other elements in terms of, that's sort of schoolboy rugby promotion of kind of, people become heroes at a very early age, and maybe there's some feeding of that mindset in terms of, when a drug like cocaine, what it does for that kind of mindset. But I do think it is about society, and I think Neil Francis does make that point.
Yeah, he does.
I would say, and like when Dan says that cocaine is rampant in Irish society, I would say, and this will come back to this in a couple of other pieces, I would say addiction is rampant in Irish society. Cocaine may be the way that addiction is manifesting itself for a lot of people. I would wonder about one thing Neil Francis says in his piece when he says people, young people, no, I don't know. I'm not in pubs. I don't know. I don't drink. I don't know. But maybe when he says people are using cocaine instead of alcohol because it's athletes want to use it. I would suspect there's an awful lot of people, and again in wider society, who are using it in combination with alcohol, and they're using it and they drink more because of it. Now, the damage that's doing to people's health physically is huge, because you're drinking more because you're taking cocaine, you're you're taking cocaine. So it's a toxic combination. So I don't know, and there are elements of it like that, but I do think it is a huge danger. But again, I would look at it as facing up, dealing with something, and dealing with the issue in terms of how you deal with addiction in society, rather than saying let's make. And it is, and I read it, and now I've a much younger son, but like when I read it, I'm like, my God, he's only 8 years away from being in a pub doing this, and I have to worry about it. And clearly because it's. But I would also worry if he was, I'll have the same worries about if he's drinking. I'll have the same worries if he's taking the drug that we all consider to be socially acceptable. So I think it is about having addiction. Now, clearly, there are other elements to cocaine use. It is and in a sporting context, as Neil Francis lays out, it is hugely dangerous to be taking it.
Well, he says on that point, so he says, if you're male and you're out for the night, why would you drink 7 or 8 points when the net result is a hangover and an inability to work out the next day? That beer also goes directly to the bottom line, your gut, and that is anathema to any self-respecting youngster who craves a sculpted body. For the athlete, cocaine is deadly. It's one of the strongest vasoconstrictors on the planet, tightening up blood vessels and restricting the flow. And he says, therefore, there is the risk of heart attack when you're exercising afterwards or with it in your system. And he does talk very generally. He's not saying this is just a sports problem. I've lost a number of friends, acquaintances through drug use, primarily involving cocaine. When I say lost, I mean they had strokes or heart attacks, or they overdosed. Some killed themselves. Others I lost are still alive, but their lives are ruined. And he talks about, depression, often a cause of suicide, can of course be caused by many factors, but what percentage, he asks, of young adults become depressed as a result of taking drugs? And he talks about teenagers and 20-somethings hopelessly ill-prepared to deal with the lows that automatically come after cocaine use, the anxiety, restlessness, increased irritability, paranoia, full-blown psychosis.
I do think that's again, look, this is, this is a really, it's so wide range, very classic Neil Francis piece in that sense, that it goes, it touches on so many areas. It makes some generalizations that you might query.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when he says, to me it is never when he's talking about depression following on from cocaine use, he says, to me it is never the other way around. Our children don't get depressed first and then start taking drugs. Now, I think anyone with any experience of addiction will know that's not always the truth. That, again, whether it's drink or drugs, that there can be people who, for whatever reason, go to them as a way of kind of escaping whatever they're feeling.
They're in a lot of pain, they need escapism.
But equally, I think for Neil Francis to be naming it is important, because we do have an awful lot, and we kind of come back to this when we talk about the Tony Adams piece in particular.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of times where we talk about depression and mental health stuff in a slightly abstract sense, and we don't talk about the things that actually get you there, like drink and like cocaine. So it's very important for him to be saying these are the things, because if you've got a 17 or 18-year-old who's talking about being depressed, and you're kind of saying, let's get them to talk to somebody about that, and that's useful and that's helpful. But if they're going out and taking cocaine, the other stuff isn't going to do much good without addressing that issue. And it's the same with alcohol. If you're going out and you're talking to somebody, or you're trying to deal with your depression, if you're not actually dealing with the thing that's triggering the depression in those instances, or dealing with a thing that is actually going to accelerate the depression or the depressive moods, then you're not having the right conversation.
I think though as well, I think the point in the context of the sporting discussion, like I think what he's hinting to there is the extent to which it's almost become normalised though, as a part of like the team night out, the
post-match celebration,
the post-match sort of event, and I mean, we are at a time, and again, you end up going into generalisation mode here as well. But people have spoken about this previously. It is a lot more, and he does touch on it, people are a little bit more image conscious now. You don't necessarily see the young sporting athletes drink their 10 or 12 pints, if you know what I mean. This is like the acceptable face in it. In the same way that you would have a big issue, I think, with, say steroids in Ireland, and sort of around the gym use and the gym bodies and all of that, and again, you end up like very generalised mode about I think people are a lot more conscious of how they look, in their presentation than 10, 15, 20 years ago even. The young lads, it's always the young lads and their bodies, and there's a different sort of fuel that's been used for that. But even, again, you hear these tales that maybe at the end of a season or at the end of a campaign, this is something that you do.
Yeah.
And that's what he touches to when you're talking about a team having a sort of a specified, dealer that looks after them. It's almost like, well, this is what you happen. And there's a broader debate around testing, I still think, in sports in Ireland, which again is a separate issue to the societal thing we're talking about here. But I mean, I don't know, there's so many layers to it. But sometimes like people know they're going to get away with it too, and that's obviously it's a for some people it's that you hear these tales that it's the one thing they can do without fear of almost repercussion, whereas sort of other things when you're being tested for your body fat and various other things, it's not the same, and that's why it's slipped in. That's why it's slipped in to an accepted part of it now.
But I think it is important, and I think this has happened in England a bit, where when people fail tests for drugs like cocaine, they do take a rehabilitation first approach to it, because it is important to recognise it as part of a society thing rather than a sporting issue.
Yeah.
In terms of like these people, like people who maybe fail those tests need treatment rather than saying we've got a drug cheat here, or we've got we're going to name this person, because they're not the damage. It sounds like this is a terrible cliche, but really the damage they're doing is to themselves.
Yeah.
And it needs to be addressed in terms of whatever issues they might have. But again, it's also, as you say, it's something they think they can do without consequence.
Yeah, like a lot of the people who are engaging with it aren't necessarily troubled in any way. It's actually just become so recreationally.
I was just going to say, there's no doubt there's an extraordinary surge at the moment. I mean, you think to so many instances. Remember the scenes ahead of the Euro 2020 final where the Sky News camera just petrified to come across another random fan snorting a white powder because it was just so commonplace. I had a really odd experience late last year. I'd been out for dinner, and we were eating outdoors, not a million miles away from here. I don't want to name the restaurant, but it was a really busy street. It was like 7 o'clock. The odd experience where just there was a well-dressed 3 fellas, 1 girl, all the lads in black tie tuxes, middle of the street, people walking up and down, and he took out whatever he was using, white substance, snorted it, but didn't even like turn to the wall. He would have urinated with far more decorum on the street. Like it was middle of the street, didn't even like, I'm going to just walk here to the corner, like just did it. And we were it sort of caught all our eye, and there was a degree of like almost a wry smile of, are we so out of touch with, because I'd say he was early 20s tops. Right. But we were like, man, are we this out of touch? Is that just so the norm now?
Yeah.
It's hard to measure these things. I don't have the stats on cocaine use because people aren't generally advertising their usage. But it was a kind of extraordinary moment. I'm sure maybe it was happening 20 years ago, but it does feel like there's a real scourge at the moment.
Yeah.
To move it on, because we're talking addiction here, and I think that's Dion's point. There's a lot of people just looking for escapism of some kind. So Tony Adams, extraordinary interview in the Sunday Times with Jonathan Northcroft. Tony Adams, the former Arsenal captain, legendary figure, 66 England caps, nearly 700 Arsenal appearances, 4-time league winner, very famously wrote Addicted as a player and became sober at the age of 29. He is now embarking on a theatre tour, like a one-man show. And he's talking about everything from his childhood panic attacks to being bullied at school, he says here, to becoming so deep in a world of drink that he once left his young son in a pub for 3 days. There were drugs, prostitutes, fights, regular times of soiling the bed. There was prison, a car crash, depression. Now, his second memoir is Sober in 2017. Addicted was written in 1998. He says of Sober, it's more grown up, but sex and sickness sells. The purpose of Sober is to get more people clean, to help with people's mental health. It has more tools, more guidance, more emotional intelligence. So tickets are selling very well. He said, I should break just about even, and if I make a profit, I'll give it to my charity. His charity is Sporting Chance, which he set up in the year 2000. That has treated 1,200 sports people through rehab and counselling. He makes an interesting observation about how Sporting Chance has changed. So he said, we now get more gambling addicts through the clinic than alcoholics. The drug of choice for Premier League footballers is gambling. Porn and gaming are the other growing fixes for young sports people with addictive personalities.
Yeah. I interviewed Adams a few years ago, and that was the point he was making as well, like that this was... and again, when you're talking about consequences, if you have a need for adrenaline, if you're... And, you know, Sporting Chance deals with, you know, sports people in the main, so it's skewed towards that. And now we all know that gambling is a huge issue, again, in society at large, but for sports people who, again, maybe can't drink because of the consequences, they have an awful lot of time on their hands. They're trying to kill time. It is the go-to in so many ways. And I remember Adams talking about various aspects, you know, just stuff around things he was campaigning for, and you know, free bets and stuff like this that are still, you know, being pushed to people who are opting out and all that. And I know in the UK, and I know from talking to other people this week as well, where the UK are going with their legislation on this is still way advanced of where we are, you know, and there's still an engagement there that is lacking here. We've decided here that once we get this regulator, eventually, I think we might have talked about this the last time, once we get this regulator, then everything is kind of in hand.
Yeah.
We've been waiting 10 years for the regulator.
Much the same way that alcohol is very much in hand.
Yeah. So like that's one aspect of it, and I'm just getting it up on my phone. So but there's also, I just think, again, and this is what the link is to
Neil Francis. I think I have here what you're going to
go on then
expand on. So where Adams, it's a brilliant interview, by the way. This is just, I mean, when you think of the piece that Neil Francis wrote there, and Tony Adams, someone of his stature, talking this way, I mean, there's some great stuff in the papers. So he's talking about the culture of treatment around mental health, and he gets very angry in this, to the point where he says, sorry, Jonathan, I'm ranting now. So he says there are 18 people per day killing themselves. That statistic has not changed in 50 years. 7.5 million of the adult population are on antidepressants because not every GP surgery has a mental health nurse, and GPs have 15 minutes per appointment. So the easiest thing is to hand out a pill. And he says mental health campaigning is just noise. It drives me insane. And at that stage, he loses his composure a bit.
And then he says, more training of practitioners, therapists, counsellors. That's what we need. I did an NHS thing the other day, and the woman organising said, Tony, can you not mention addiction? Talk about your panic attacks, your PTSD, your anxiety, your depression, but for F's sake, don't talk about addiction. We've got no money and resources. So don't talk about the thing. Talk about everything except the thing.
Yeah.
Because if you talk about the thing, people might recognise that they too have this thing, and we don't have any way of dealing with the people who are going to come to us to look for treatment for that. Now, I would say if anyone is reading or is listening and thinking that I want to, you know, Tony Adams, and I remember reading Addicted and finding it an inspirational book. And there are, you know, the way Tony Adams got help, the way he's, you know, that is always available to people. You know, those programs are always available to people.
Yeah.
But the other stuff and the, you know, the waiting list, and again, whatever is true about happening in the UK now, they have a huge problem with NHS waiting lists everywhere in every sector in Britain at the moment. But you talk to anybody here about trying to get mental health appointments, trying to see somebody, and it's shocking. It's really shocking how long people. And again, as he says, you need this now. You need this today, not in 6 months, not in 2 years, whatever you're going to be told. And it's and it is because, you know, when you that thing, just that sense of be as abstract as you can be, because we can't handle the realities of actually saying this is, you might need to have treatment for this, or you might need to deal with this. So you know, it's a really, and it's a, you know, it's a classic Adam. Like Adams, anyone who's seen Adams doing punditry knows he's kind of he is an eccentric person, and it goes off in tangents, and sometimes when I'm like, I kind of think, the sort of stuff he's talking about football, I'm like, is that what you really feel? Did that really happen? Like, when he says Emmanuel Petit is the best player he ever played, I feel like that's the thing he's just come up with in his head today, which is fine. It's not the key point of this interview. And I think that is a really kind of striking comment that he makes, and is an important one, because he says, I'm doing no more mental health days, because just
it's a cod.
The Red Cross do very well sorry, not the Red Cross. Charities like mine, the Samaritans, the Red Cross do very well in raising awareness, but they don't have support services. And that is, and again, without having the figures, but I think, we know that that's also the issue here.
Doesn't it all speak, say the Neil Francis piece or the Tony Adams piece, and there's an interview with Nicky Rackard's daughter, and he was an alcoholic and wrote about it actually, which was quite revolutionary in the 1970s, which we'll come to in a moment. But it just speaks of how flawed and fragile human beings are at large, how difficult life is. I was going to say modern life, but I think life's generally been pretty difficult down the centuries if you look, and how, be it alcohol or drugs or increasingly porn or gambling, the masses are in a lot of pain and looking for any bits of escapism or any fix, as Tony Adams says, and the consequences are dire. And the States, not just the UK, not just Ireland, the States across the board, completely ill-equipped to deal with it. Everyone's doing the best they can, but this is just a rife problem. And the commonality across all the pieces, be it Neil Francis, who says, I've no easy solution for this, or Tony Adams, is that there is no solution for this.
It's not especially uplifting, really. Like, I mean, it is like, and without going down the road, like, you're obviously coming off the back of a sort of, a lengthy lockdown, which probably accelerated a lot of situations for people too, or sort of, led to some kind of reevaluation or whatever, and services would have been even less available than at that stage, for obvious reasons. So, yeah, and I suppose, like, we have, like, the sort of the high-end sports stars, and I mean, the Tony Adams point, I mean, the headline that draws people in is like, well, the drug now, I don't have it quite in front of me, or the drug now is
drug
gambling.
Of choice is gambling.
Drug of choice for gambling.
For Premier League footballers.
Yeah, for Premier League footballers. And that, but the story is obviously much deeper than that, but that obviously is the attention-grabbing one. And I mean, it is the extent to which, the story, like, it is still powerful, someone like Tony Adams coming out and speaking. It does have a purpose. I know sometimes now there is a sense of, you almost hear people grumbling with almost fatigued, or here's someone else talking about some footballer talking about their issue, but it does actually matter to people. Everyone who sort of finds a voice to sort of articulate their own experience, because there's always someone searching or looking for that information or looking for help. Even if they can't find a service, they end up Googling or reading or finding something, looking for something. And even someone like Tony Adams sort of speaking about his experiences, even if he doesn't paint a particularly cheery outlook and is a slightly different one than a first person sort of tell all. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it is one of these debates where we're going around talking about the concerns, but where do we go with it? Like, it's about sort of hoping that you keep drumming home the point, and that it raises the broader awareness of it. But
it's funny, I read the Tony Adams and the interview with Marion Rackard, Nicky Rackard's daughter, this morning before I read Neil Francis. And I was thinking, is there anything hopeful? And I was thinking, there's one thing, before I read Neil Francis, the one thing I actually think that the younger generation have over previous generations, certainly in terms of alcohol, is that it's not the only way they have of going to bars, are not the only way they have of meeting people. Meeting people they're attracted to, going out and having, you have, social media for all the stuff people criticize it for. It allows people to connect in ways that doesn't mean, when I was, a teenager, it was go somewhere where you're going to drink yourself stupid and, hopefully meet, that was the plan. That was the only plan. Now, maybe it's still the only plan a lot of the time, but there are other ways of connecting with people and staying in touch with people and making contact with people, which, you know, for all the stuff we say about social media and all the problems of it, which are true and which it can be damaging to, that is one aspect where you could actually take a little bit of hope. Then I read Neil Francis talking about cocaine use in 16, 17-year-olds. Okay, well, forget that.
Yeah.
But I do think, I guess one area now, you know, do you want to go into the Marion Rackard one?
We'll touch on it because we do want to move on, because this is probably a heavy theme, but it's just by work of coincidence, it's been a theme across the papers.
It is. I mean, across the papers today, like a lot of the better pieces are in this area. It's just it's a coincidental almost that that's the case.
The headline is, "I'd no idea of the impact my father's drinking had," and it's a picture of Marion Rackard, Nicky Rackard's daughter. Nicky Rackard, one of the truly, truly great hurlers. He was in the team of the century. If you walk through Wexford Town, you'll see his statue, All-Ireland winner at Wexford. And in the 1970s, he wrote in the Sunday Press about his battle with alcoholism, which was a very revolutionary thing to do. We weren't, as Dennis Walsh points out, we weren't really of the confessional pieces in the paper type back then. So, for instance, you know, an excerpt from his Sunday Press piece in 1975. "Once I went to a ball on a Friday. I came to myself in the local pub the following Tuesday, still in my dress suit. I didn't have a total blackout for the 5 days, but there were large gaps in my recollection. I still wouldn't admit to myself that I was an alcoholic." And ultimately, he took his last drink in 1970. He was 48 years of age. His daughter Marion, who's interviewed in this piece, was 15. And he lived for 6 more years and succumbed to cancer in the end. And I suppose in those 6 years, he reflected on his situation and wrote about it. So what was particularly bad for him was after he won the All-Ireland in 56. He hadn't been drinking for 5 years at that stage, but on a trip to New York, in the aftermath of the All-Ireland win, he drank again. Over the next 13 years, his life and the life of those around him descended into hell. His veterinary practice suffered from neglect and he fell into debt. And Marion is just recounting it here. And, you know, it's you wouldn't need to be Freud or to stretch too far as to how this happened, but she herself became a nurse and then went into addiction counselling and into psychotherapy. And she just talked about what it's like to grow up with your father who's succumbed to addiction and how difficult it is and just the marks it leaves. And Dennis Walsh writes about a residue of anxiety, depression and self-esteem issues. And she talks about, you know, your relationship with your parents has been so fundamental in every way. So nobody comes out unscathed. And she says maybe in his reflections later in life, the one area he found difficult to really delve into and be totally honest about was the effects it had maybe on his wife and on the children. Maybe that was just too difficult for him to countenance. So again, it's a fantastic interview. I don't quite know how it came about, but it's really good.
It's a brilliant, and Dennis Walsh is a brilliant writer to do it. And it's funny because I knew the Nicky Rackard story, and to me Nicky Rackard was something of a hero because of like an extraordinary thing for a man in Ireland to do, a man who had achieved what Nicky Rackard had done and had achieved, to actually reach this point of self-awareness. To me, who only knew the kind of bare bones of the story, was kind of extraordinary at that period. And then you read, and I still, you know, it is phenomenal that he did stop drinking. And, you know, it opens up, this piece opens up with Marion Rackard on her 21st birthday, a fortnight after her father died. She accepted an invitation to speak at an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was the kind of thing her father had done many times during the last half a dozen years of his life. But as you say, the consequences of it for families. And she set up, 20 years ago, was one of the founders of Alcohol Action Ireland, a charity whose purpose was to change societal attitudes to drink. And that struck me as well, because again, we're talking about this and you're like, you know, that is a charity which clearly is very well-meaning. How effective has it been? Because when I read some of the stuff that Nicky Rackard wrote in 1975, I'm thinking, like the one you quoted, once I went to a ball on a Friday and came to myself in the local pub on the following Tuesday morning, I still wouldn't admit to myself that I was an alcoholic. How many people would have weekends like that and wouldn't even cross their mind that there's something. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe they'd stop on Sunday. Maybe it'd be Sunday or Monday or something, and so maybe Tuesday might be maybe a day too far for most people. But I don't know how much. I don't know how much reckoning we've done about that societal attitude to drink. And, you know, again, Dennis quotes from his piece. I thought this was a quote from the interview, but it's actually from 1975. Yes. In Ireland, while the alcoholic carries a stigma unjustly, the drunk is treated with a sort of amused tolerance. It is much...
Still is.
It is much harder to be a person who walks into a pub and say, I'm not drinking.
Yeah.
Why? What's like... than to be somebody who's going to go in and drink 14 pints,
messy drunk in the corner, yeah.
And we're talking about 50 years ago, and we still have that. So again, in all the pieces, I know we want to move on, but I just think those put together, it does tell us something about, and it goes back to what we said about Neil Francis, talking about the thing and naming the thing, and what Tony Adams said, like. It is critical. It is really critical, and it still is critical. You know, 47 years after Nicky Rackard did those pieces in the Sunday Press.
I must go back and read them. I didn't know he had written about it in the Sunday Press in 1975.
I wasn't aware of that at all. I mean, like maybe sort of ignorance through sort of age. I knew he was a hurler, but you know the Nicky Rackard Cup.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily know the story behind. The man.
Brief tangent, actually. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. So I mentioned Katie Taylor's on the top right-hand corner of the Sunday Times, for instance. And Dan, you took out your phone to show me that if anybody has the Sunday Independent e-paper this morning, which I'm sure lots do, then Con O'Callaghan won't mind, I'm sure. He's been replaced on the old analogue version with the picture of Katie Taylor celebrating.
And a Sean McGoldrick report from New York as well.
Yeah, I know Mick Foley's over there for the Times, and lots of journalists have gone over. And so... You know, I think it's one of those stories where if we were doing the paper review 5, but certainly 10 years ago, we would have highlighted how, you know, God, this is why papers are potentially in grave decline and there's nothing they can do here. They can't compete with the digital world. It strikes me, just by quirk of coincidence, we have 2 journalists here who are part of successful subscription models. And I suspect lots of independent readers now predominantly read their stuff online as opposed to buying the paper every day. And it does seem, you know, the Independent's recently gone subscription model. It does seem as if readers are increasingly far more happy to pay for quality than they were, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Whenever the Irish Times first went subscription and readers en masse said, hang on, I'm not paying for, I'm not paying for this. And it was a big disaster. And the Times then walked back from that and was free, but has subsequently managed to put together a very successful subscription model. It does feel as if it's a less grim picture, me saying, oh, Katie Taylor's not in the papers here, because people are paying to read about it online.
Yeah, I mean, without going too far down a sort of a media sort of wormhole, I suppose, but there is there's a lot of good reading this morning, you know, on the Katie Taylor fight, and certainly I didn't stay up and watch it. I got up and watched it, so you know, you wake up this morning and you can be reasonably well served. It wasn't like even Gavin Casey's piece, I must say, in the 42 is extremely good. Yeah, live report, which really brings you there. I mean, we had Sean McGoldrick there, as you mentioned, and the other sites. Yeah, like it's the move towards the subscription model. I mean, how we did it in Ireland is still slightly. Sometimes the wrong way around, you know. We went sort of free for a long. The Times were almost ahead of its time, maybe with the subscription. It went too early potentially with it, and then so other companies would have given their stuff away free for a long time, and then subsequently put a paywall, which is what our company did. But thankfully, the take up on the subscription has been very good. You still have very good online service at the 42, which everything is available for free, effectively still, and then obviously you have the currency you've come on board. I know that's not sports per se, but has a sporting content, and that sort of subscription-only model. And it seems in the last sort of 18 months or so, and I think maybe as well part of that was the lockdown as well too. To be fair, that I think it probably got a lot of people, more people it would seem, into the habit of paying for online content.
Do you know what I think it is as well? a lot of people have realised they're paying for Netflix, Spotify, etc. That's all incredibly normalised, and they've realised, God, why wouldn't I pay for my news?
Yeah, no, it's still slightly smaller numbers, and this is part of the.
You're not doing as well as
acceptance.
Netflix or
well,
Spotify.
well, then, but the Netflix has lost 200,000 subscribers and all those shared accounts. But like, it is slightly smaller numbers. But I think like media are still here trying to figure out what people pay for as well too, which is the interesting thing. That like, are people necessarily going to subscribe to read a say about a lot of, say, Premier League stuff that is available everywhere on all manner of sites? And sometimes you find that people are more willing to subscribe for like slightly more niche stuff, you know, which is interesting. You can sort of track the data of what people will pay for and what they won't pay for, and it might surprise you sometimes, you know, what that actually might be. And sometimes, you know, it's something like the Katie Taylor one is an interesting thing, because I mean, the fight is over when people get up this morning. So what can you know, then you possibly have you just have to provide the free news service, and it's the quality stuff around it that you're trying to find the right balance. But I think, yeah, people are now certainly, like, people are they're sort of subscribing to sort of brands as opposed to papers, if you know what I mean. Like, there is a sense of like that they're you know, you chat to people who are, I don't know, Dion maybe is well placed to speak about this, because the currency has sort of gone into that market with no paper behind it, you know, and you still can't lose sight of like the paper reader, which still exists, and particularly at the weekend you have a lot of people buying a physical paper, and it's trying to get them to transfer to online as well too, which is part of the challenge.
Look, I think there'll always be Sunday papers, and people want to fall asleep on the couch and have read 5% of the behemoth that they've bought, and they're happy with that kind of luxury item, I suppose, in a sense. Just one last question. Are you finding, without divulging information you're not comfortable divulging, are you finding that the paying reader are gravitating towards a big feature you would have, or Paul Kimmage 6,000 words meeting Shane Lowry, as opposed to 400 word piece on Conor McGregor buys new car?
Yeah, well, you see, I think that what you'll find is that Conor McGregor buying a new car, well, that will probably be freely available. You know, they're the pieces that you run out for free, or the match report of Newcastle Liverpool that finished 10 minutes ago. There's no point putting that behind a paywall. You know what I mean? Like, people will have probably watched that game, but again, without divulging sort of, you know, trade secrets or something, like, you know, you can see the pieces that do very well, like, you know, and like, it's something like, you know, a big Paul Kimmage read with sort of Jason McAteer, for example, recently. You know, I think that would have done incredibly well, and it shows that, like, people, when presented with what appears to be an in-depth sort of painstaking piece, will subscribe and pay for that piece, which is heartening. I've had it one or two pieces. You know, I did a piece earlier this year, and this is my point about sort of niche. I did a piece earlier this year, say, on what's happened to Cork City in the last decade, which is a sort of a.
It's not Conor McGregor buys car.
No, it's not. But it actually did incredibly well in terms of like a take-up of people taking subscriptions off, which is unusual. But so that's actually heartening that people are determined to pay for journalism. But you might have had more eyes on it if it was free. But it's about, you know, the history. It's your
ego versus the business.
But this is always the thing. But I mean, the papers gave away their stuff here for free online for too long. That was clearly a mistake. You know, that was clearly a mistake. Mr.
Currency, speak to us. Interestingly, you had a piece beyond the paywall just this weekend. So give us your verdict. Are you heartened, as Dan said, by the take-up and by hopefully people being willing to pay for quality and realising and sensing what is quality and what isn't? Yeah,
I also think there's a kind of a sort of almost imperceptible shift in how journalists talk about it. For a long time, there was a lot of stuff, you know, people would hashtag buy a paper or do this for the good of journalism. Now people I think it's now changed to we will give you the good stuff, but you're going to but you'll be paying for it. And I think that's the only way it ever works. Like, it only works if you're giving people things that they feel they want to read or they're interested in reading. It can't be as a kind of public duty to say, you know, that's why the hashtag buy a paper thing always made me laugh, because it's like, it's not going to work. No. Like, people aren't going to change their habits.
Can't guilt them into buying a paper.
Yeah, because you feel they must do so. But like, at the Currency, like, we've just made a profit. You know, it's a very new company, started just before lockdown. Like, two of Ireland's best journalists, Tom Lyons and Ian Keogh, started, and it's driven by those values, and it is heartening to see how people have taken to it. Some of the and then what you're obviously always trying to attract new subscribers and new people, but you're also always trying to give value to the subscribers. So like you talk about the Liverpool piece being outside the paywall, like that's a way of kind of letting people know about what kind of stuff is there as well. But also, the people who are subscribers are getting, and since I joined January 21, it's all around what we do at the weekends. And so it's, you're trying to get new subscribers through it, but you're also saying to the people who are subscribing that there's more, you're getting more for your commitment. And that is the other important thing too. So it's, but again, and then going back, like it is interesting. I think, you say people will always buy newspapers at the weekend. They probably will. But I think as a practitioner as well, the one thing that has struck me, and I've worked for two very different digital companies since I left The Independent, but there was always a sense of kind of moving forward and trying new things. But as a journalist, I think one of the things that actually being digital only means, like this weekend being a good example, is that you're not tied to the slightly obsolete technology that is a print newspaper. And one of the things that I found, and I find that week in, week out now, where we're like, do we have something to say about something? There's a space on a page that we need to fill. It's like, is there something interesting we can add to this, or is there something we can say about this? Which for years it was the other way. We've all done it. Like we need 900 words. Like I've done Ireland press conference. I don't know why all the Ireland press conferences jump into my head, but they always do. We
still do them, Dion.
I know. I'm sorry, Dan. And I
choose your words carefully.
I will
here,
be
right?
very okay. Yeah. Let me think of a player who's retired.
How grim must that be?
We need 900 words. We've done 900 words waiting on this. We need to do 900 words on this. I'm sorry, I don't look at Dan while I'm saying this. But that sinking
now
feeling.
Now we just decide if people need this or not. They need this in their life.
Don't ring them and tell them they don't need this.
But people subscribe to read his thoughts on an Ireland press conference.
But sometimes people do as well. Like this
I'm kidding.
Is the thing,
Of course they do.
It's the definition sometimes of premium versus the rolling news service. It's like the PA, that it's there for people. It's like, it is one of these things sometimes that because it's not the most pleasurable stuff to write or do, that we can sometimes say, well, people don't care what players say at a press conference. And then sometimes you can actually track the data and see, well, actually quite a lot of people have actually read that. It's not the award-winning piece or prize, or it's not something that maybe you want to invest a whole lot of time and energy in sending someone to do it, but there's still a degree of carrying.
But anyway, without going to, I would say sometimes there's like, it's, that ability to say, there's nothing in this.
Yeah, that's true.
Versus, we have to write something about this because otherwise
it's a real luxury.
No, of course.
But equally, there are times when it's worth doing. But beyond that, no, I think it's like clearly people have. You're right. Like I think people have are aware now, or just feel more comfortable doing it. And that's what you want, because I think, and it's, and like, as Dan said, and we were both at The Independent when they were giving everything away. And, I think then on the ego point, like obviously when you make something free, or when it's free, you do reach people. But there's also that sense, like I think there is a kind of a quieter satisfaction as journalists when you're kind of going, people are paying for this. People are, and that payment is actually allowing us, is giving us some sense of comfort and knowledge that we are actually, and this is what the currency is all about, is like everything we're investing, everything people are spending is actually going to people doing journalism and going to do more of it. So you actually feel like, right, that investment is, it's not the direct ego hit of, God, Dion, you're amazing.
Yeah.
which I always do like, I have to admit.
And you are amazing.
Thank you, Joe. That's why I'm here. But also, you don't get as much of the opposite of that.
Sure.
So it is encouraging.
We won't get time to touch on every piece we had picked out. So a huge number of GAA match reports, and you have things like Joe Brawley's writing about the importance of GAA in Tyrone and how they're all very Tyrone focused as opposed to the club game there. You have Colin O'Rourke on the Dubs Born Again Blues show, the old dog can still bite. So lots of GAA coverage. You also picked out a couple of pieces. There's a Mickey Whelan interview in the Sunday Independent. He's released his autobiography very reluctantly, and it's
nice piece by Dermot Crowe.
Yeah, really good shot. Yeah, he tells stories from yesteryear gone very well, and talks the loss of his wife and Kevin Heffernan both died in 2013, and tells some nice stories, memories of those two. And there's a great picture of him outside Crow Park, 83 years old now, pretty much a legend in his own time. Each day he walks around 15k, and he lifts dumbbells still, which we should all be doing as we get older. And he says at the end, this is how the piece finishes, "I'm not going to boast to you, but I'll stand up and show you," he says, pointing to an area of his shoulder along the collarbone. "Feel that area, that. A ripple of hard muscle meets your fingertips," is what Dermot Crowe writes. Which of us haven't asked people to feel that there?
Yeah,
it's kind of a funny end, but he's in good form, and it very reluctantly has written this autobiography, but I suspect it'll be worth the read. So that's Mickey Whelan. You picked out Shane McGrath on Roy Keane and Hibs, Dan. So in effect, Shane McGrath is saying that Roy Keane will potentially have to do a difficult thing here, and he will have to acknowledge that really a club appointing him, writes Shane, as their manager would see a big boost in ticket sales and TV trucks parked up outside the stadium a lot more often. It's a fate Keane should avoid, and it would take extraordinary self-possession to admit as much, but he should recognise that a club wanting him as its manager is probably attracted more by reputation than nous, and therefore he should pass on the Hibs job and pass on other jobs, I suspect, unless it's really too good to be true, and it's an amazing offer. Keane now sought for fame more than managerial skills, is the headline.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I would necessarily agree with every point contained within the piece, but it's just you could argue that, was it that attraction that got Roy Keane the Sunderland job at whatever, 35, 36? Possibly that was a factor in it too.
Could I put it to the only difference being that was a shot on somebody where you thought, well, he has incredible potential here, and there's a lot to point to him being a formidable presence in the dressing room, whereas in 2022 those questions have been answered.
Yeah, well, I don't know. The Keane one, Keane is like the recurring news story of like Roy Keane linked with a particular job, and that's one that definitely always guaranteed to get good traffic, it must be said. Roy Keane stories are always good for business for everyone. And the extent to which this one actually is legit, I think, is debatable. The Sunderland one definitely was something that was very much happening and could have happened. The sense I've got with this one this week, maybe not as much. It's a little bit sort of more vague in terms of the extent of the interest even from either party, if you know what I mean. And Hibs themselves have a slightly trigger-happy reputation in recent times that I do think from Keane's perspective, listen, Keane's always been self-aware enough. Like Keane knows his power. Like he's always known his power. And I don't think that would, the idea that someone is hiring him because he's a big name, that is the story of his recent life. Like
Sure.
He'd have known that with punditry, he'll have known that with commercial opportunities, he'll know that with a lot of other situations, and in fact he always did as a player too. Keane, for all his flaws, he does have a degree of self-awareness around his pulling power, his own status, even the Instagram stuff and everything. He knows how that's going to work.
Despite his protestations.
Yeah, it's protesting too much. Like really, it is at times it's protesting too much, and that's part of the charm for people. I think with Keane, it's more so a case that I think he really would take a job if it was offered to him. That Gary Neville interview recently, was it the overlap, the one, the most, and again, as I said, with Keane, sometimes he goes into character and there's layers to it. But the one time he was genuinely, I felt, angry and engaged was when he was talking about all these other managers who keep getting jobs. You know, and he went on about the people who get 5, 6, 7, 8 chances. And you could speculate who he's talking about there. It could be anyone from sort of Mick McCarthy to Gary Rowett or whoever it might be. And you sense that Keane is sort of bursting to get back in, but there's maybe a little part of him niggling away that knows that he probably has one more shot. And if he went to a club that, you know, it didn't go particularly well and they had a little slightly trigger happy tendencies, well, then he's done. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I'd still think, and Dion's covered Roy Keane probably for longer than me, and the sort of the various aspects to his character. Like, you still wonder, is Roy Keane as the pundit happy? You know, and that is the debate. And is there an itch there that he still wants to scratch, that he won't rest, that he'll always carry that little bit of anger until there's one more gig in him? And maybe that one more gig is the gig that makes him realise, actually, no, I'm actually happy where I am on Sky. But I wonder, will that always linger, that sense of unfinished business? Because Roy Keane wasn't meant to leave football. I know he was Ireland assistant and Aston Villa assistant, but he wasn't meant to leave football as the Ipswich manager,
Yeah.
you know, who sort of left ingloriously.
Shane makes the point, and this, I suppose, is one of the key points, the exasperation he often expresses in the studio with the carry-on of today's players does not suggest he would easily make peace with the environment prevailing in dressing rooms today. This is the thing, like, we talk about Keane as if he's 75. With good reason, like, I totally understand. Really, I agree with that point. And yet, Pep Guardiola, at the cutting edge of 21st century management, is younger than Roy Keane.
Well, it's funny. I was going to make...
Sorry, older
Yeah.
than Roy Keane.
You see, that point about players today, like, that point has been being made about players today has been an expression used for about 25 years.
Yeah.
You know, so it isn't a new idea, and the idea of older pros being exasperated by whatever they get up to is has been with us now for a generation.
See, this is his personality. You think back to his autobiography, and there's a searing, scorching chapter in it, the Eamon Dunphy one, where he's recalling the '94 World Cup and the indulgence, as I think he saw it, of the nonsense, as I think he saw it, around the three amigos. And he does point out, after laying it all out, you know, the hype and the photos and all this nonsense, and like, they're just young lads. He does point out, I was 22 years old.
Yeah, he was the same age. He was younger, probably younger than Phil Babb.
He's had a fairly exasperated view of the modern day player since he was about 20.
But he was doing it then.
Correct.
And the Pep Guardiola point, and the link there, I think, as well, is, like, you know, Dan, and we were talking about him taking over at Sunderland and just the potential of what could he be. Like, I remember going to a lot of Sunderland games when he was, you know, that first season in the Championship, and I went to his unveiling when he did, like, because, you know, it's crazy now, although Shane touches on it as well, but, like, the image of Keane in Britain at that point was of the kind of the thug, the guy who took out Haaland, and he spent this day, he spent this day at the unveiling doing every bit of about 4 or 5 hours doing press, and had everyone eating out of his hand. Like, it was just that phenomenal, funny Keane. And times during that season, you thought, this guy is going to be anything as a manager. This guy's, and, you know, at the same time, a year later, and like this, I do think there's a thing about players who, and I think Lampard, in a strange way, at Everton, and you saw it last week with the way they played against Liverpool, and he referenced his own career as a Chelsea player. Players who've been successful, I think, are damaged in some ways in terms of how much they can absorb new ideas and be modern, because they have this template to fall back on, which Keane does to caricature levels of, like, this is how we did it. Lampard fell back. You know, Lampard is a young manager and he was playing an outdated way of football last weekend. But the counter argument to that is Guardiola, who did everything as a player. Now, okay, Barcelona are a slightly different club, but he comes into management a year after Keane at Barcelona B and becomes one of the most evolutionary, progressive thinkers the game has ever seen. Keane hasn't done that. He's frozen in time. He's talking about players. He's look at and it is interesting and it's dynamic and it's exciting when he has a go on Sky, but it isn't the own. Look at Jurgen Klopp. Nobody could ever whatever about Pep, and nobody could ever say Klopp isn't interesting or isn't exciting or isn't dynamic, and yet he manages. And this is why it's not a recent thing, because Wenger and Ferguson did it too. They managed to be enraptured by their players, at least publicly, and encouraging of their players. And look at the way. Can you imagine Roy Keane dealing with the Mo Salah contract conversation?
Yeah.
Can you imagine how he would have deal with it rather than the way Klopp deals with it, where he just makes everything is fine, whatever is going to happen. Who knows? And Klopp knows probably a lot more. But he's never he's not coming out. Keane would lose his.
Well, he had a situation with John Walters leaving.
Yeah.
One of the most sound, admirable footballers you can meet. But Keane almost took it personally when actually Walters was taking a very pragmatic decision to go from a Championship club to a Premier League one, which is exactly what Keane, the player, would have done almost in that.
So the point, sorry. So can I just finish? So the point, No. I think that's the point I would say about this, and whether he has one last crack at management. It doesn't matter how many more cracks at management he has, unless Keane is actually going to go in and do something different, or be something different. And do we think there's any chance of that?
Well, it strikes me because in quite a few of the interviews, even the most recent one with Carragher, where he felt he would not get another crack, what he said was, when you have a great dressing room or a good dressing room, it's the best job in the world, and he loves it. But he said, when you don't have a great dressing room, and he said something very withering to the extent of his complete intolerance for that kind of a situation. I think he needs to face the reality that great dressing rooms, one, are very few and far between, and two, he's almost certainly unlikely to inherit one from a manager who's been sacked. And so he needs to almost...
Where does he think the great dressing room comes from?
Well, indeed.
Where does he? How does that happen? That's it is that expression. I used it last week talking about Manchester United in a piece. The saying, if you meet one asshole in the morning, you've met an asshole. Yeah. If you meet 5 assholes during the day, maybe it's you're the asshole.
Yeah.
And Roy Keane goes into a dressing. Who are all these? Incredibly, who are these assholes?
He called them frauds and con men, not real pros. But I think if he could just get in and have the patience to root them out slowly and not lose his spirit and his love for the job and bring in the type of players he likes to work with, there aren't those.
His definition of a great dressing room may not exist anymore.
Well, that's true.
You look at the end of the Football League yesterday, Rotherham promoted and whoever else was promoted, Wigan, they may have a great dressing room, but it's moulded in the realities of what football is now. And it may not be Roy Keane's definition of a great dressing room. There may not be people calling people out in the dressing room and telling them to stand up. It actually may be tolerant sometimes of people's weaknesses in a way that Keane may not be tolerant of some of those things. You could have players indulged in those dressing rooms who he wouldn't indulge, but that is maybe what defines a great dressing room now.
But then to give him, but this is where the endless contradictions are. He's seen a Cantona being indulged. He's talked openly about indulging certain players. It's not like he's totally black or white.
Keane was indulged.
Yeah, for sure. So he would
Keane
understand that.
Keane was indulged. This is the thing, and this is the... But he was indulged in a way that he sees was kind of the way real men were indulged.
Yeah.
And again, it's a self mythology. It's a romanticization around things. Alex Ferguson had to come and get the story after they won the league in '99. Keane ended up in a prison cell in Manchester, in a police cell in Manchester. And Alex Ferguson has to go and get him. Is that indulged? Is that a manager? Which manager is indulging a player more? Alex Ferguson, who does that and recognises that this player is so important to me, or a manager who overlooks, say, his player exchanging shirts at half time with a member of the opposition, or something that would enrage Keane. Now Keane would see them as this is just me going out, and that's what we did, and that's how we. But he was indulged.
Yeah, and people, I know we're probably in time, but
We
like
are.
the contradiction of like people will always talk about Roy Keane with his high standards, but there's that great story, about the time he was at Ipswich, he let the players out on a night out after a trip to Spain or something, and actually then berated the squad that no one got in trouble after the night out. Yeah. So people are trying to figure out, hang on, what do we want?
Because
here?
that's what he
You're
sees
not,
again.
you're not a proper group of men here. I wanted a phone call here
to be fair to him, he is so complex that some of the players he really liked and gravitated towards at Manchester United, like a Mark Bosnich, who turned up late for training, and Keane remembered, like, geez, I got a taxi to training the first day and followed it so I wouldn't be late, so I knew the way. Bosnich turns up late for his first day, and Keane's like, geez, late to training, your first day for Manchester United. But he couldn't help but say, he was a good lad, he was fun, and I liked him. So he's not intolerant of, like, you wouldn't think him and Mika Richards were the dream team, and yet he does have an ability to connect with someone who's much younger, obsessed with social media, and is totally at odds with him personality-wise, which is why I feel like there could still be something. But if he can bring,
but if he can bring
with the right number two, with the right coach, with the right coach,
it's not the right. It's nothing like that. It is. He would need to bring something different to be able to maintain that personality. Because one of the things I think is interesting about Keane when he is on Sky is that I don't like, people they it's banter, but it is like the way they will take the piss out of the Roy Keane persona, because they don't care. They don't really care like what Roy Keane says to them. They're all independent people who how Roy Keane responds has no impact on their lives. And I think, if Keane could somehow allow that same kind of, and he responds because he kind of feels like these guys, they're not afraid of me. And I think if he could actually allow that in when he's dealing with dressing rooms, but I think when he gets into a dressing room, we've seen it. We saw, Ipswich, saw it with Ireland. We saw when he gets into a dressing room, the other things take over, and until that changes, I don't think it really matters how many jobs he takes.
Maybe he'll mellow. 51 now. I hope there's one more chapter in it. I'd hate to see him in a Sky studio for the next decade and a half, and that be it.
But it will be a chapter where the whole point is, are we waiting for the football, or are we watching for the explosion? And that's, and listen,
hopefully the football and a few explosions will be fine.
Yeah, the press conferences.
We are out of time. We're way out of time. But thank you so much. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent, Dion Fanning, Associate Editor at The Currency. Gents, thanks very much for popping in. Enjoy the chat.
The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.